Hey there, and welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
We're jumping into a topic today that, well, let's be honest, has probably crossed everyone's mind at some point.
Right.
Sex drive.
Mm-hmm.
Or, as the sources we're looking at today call it, libido.
Right.
Maybe you've wondered, what exactly is a normal sex drive? Why does it sometimes feel like it's, I don't know, on a roller coaster?
Yeah. Why does it seem to change so much over time?
Exactly.
It's one of those really fundamental parts of being human, isn't it? But it's so deeply personal. It varies so widely. And yeah, it can be incredibly confusing when it shifts.
So our mission today is basically to take the material you've shared with us, really digging into these sources about libido, and try to pull out the most important, maybe even surprising insights for you.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to unpack how the sources define it, look at the huge range of factors they identify that can cause it to ramp up or maybe dial down,
Right.
and then touch on some potential ways the sources suggest for increasing it, strictly based on what's in front of us, of course.
Think of this as like a shortcut to understanding the complex landscape of sexual desire. We're pulling insights from research that touches on physical health, psychological states, even external stuff like culture and relationships.
Trying to do it without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Engagingly, quickly.
Okay, let's dive right in then. When the sources talk about libido, how do they actually define this thing we're exploring?
Well, the basic definition they give is pretty straightforward. Libido is simply another word for sex drive.
Okay.
It refers to a person's desire, their urge, to engage in sexual activity.
A simple enough definition, sure, but the sources immediately make it clear it's not really a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. It's described as existing on a spectrum. It varies hugely from one person to the next.
Right.
What feels like a high drive for one person might be low for another, and vice versa.
Yeah.
It's really relative to your own feelings and desires.
And this seems crucial for everyone to understand. It naturally fluctuates. Your normal at one point in your life might look very different later on.
Precisely. That fluctuation over time, it's completely expected. It's actually normal in itself.
All right, so, okay, with that understanding, it's a spectrum. It changes. What did the source material tell us about the forces that might push that desire higher? What causes an increase, according to these sources?
So the sources list a few interesting points here. They highlight a link between physical activity and higher sex drives. There's one study mentioned that suggests people who exercise tend to, report higher libido.
Okay, so getting your body moving could potentially get your desire moving too. Makes sense. What else did the sources point to?
They do mention drug use. Specifically, stimulant drugs like cocaine are highlighted as potentially increasing libido, though obviously that comes with massive risks.
Yeah, definitely not a recommended strategy there. What about, like, chemical changes within the body or brain? Hormones, neurotransmitters?
Yeah, that comes up when they talk about neurotransmitters. The sources note, for instance, that people with Parkinson's disease who are on dopamine replacement therapy can sometimes experience what's called hypersexuality or atypical sexual behavior.
Wow.
It really points to the powerful role dopamine plays,
Yeah.
That pleasure and reward chemical in the brain seems quite linked to desire.
And then there's the one many people probably think of first, hormones, specifically testosterone.
Yes, that's mentioned. Some older research referenced in the material suggested a link between higher testosterone levels in men and higher sex drives.
Okay.
We'll touch on the female side later, but for men, that's a connection noted in the sources, based on that older work.
So exercise, certain stimulant drugs, neurotransmitter effects like with dopamine, and potentially testosterone levels in men based on older research. That's the side of the equation that might boost desire.
According to these sources, yes.
Now let's flip it. Let's look at the other side. It seems like a vast landscape of factors the sources say can decrease libido. This list feels much longer, and it touches on so many different parts of life and health.
It really is extensive, which I think just underscores how many different inputs can affect desire. Let's maybe group some of these.
Good idea.
Okay, so the sources highlight significant physiological changes, like menopause in females.
Right.
They show that the decrease in sexual hormones during menopause often leads to a decline in sex drive and also arousal. Several studies point to this.
That hormonal shift, yeah, that makes a lot of sense as a direct biological cause. What about broader life factors, like outside the body?
Culture and religion are cited.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, according to some research mentioned, highly restrictive religious or cultural beliefs may be associated with lower levels of sexual desire.
So external beliefs shaping internal feelings.
Seems like it. It speaks to that external influence.
And mental health is another huge piece here, isn't it?
Absolutely critical. The sources indicate that conditions like anxiety or depression, they can significantly increase the risk of sexual health difficulties for both men and women.
And low sex drive is part of that.
Yeah, decreased sex drive is noted as a common manifestation. It's a really powerful example of that mind-body connection.
Age also appears on the list.
It does. One older study mentioned suggests a general decrease in libido tends to occur once people reach age 60. It's noted as a correlation they found.
Okay, and wait. I saw obesity cited as a factor, too.
It is. The research links obesity with sexual health difficulties. Now, the source doesn't go into super deep detail on why in every case,
Right.
but it suggests that the physical health challenges that can come with obesity could play a role in reducing desire.
What about chronic illnesses? Things like diabetes or heart disease. I mean, they feel like they could impact overall energy well-being.
They definitely come up in the sources. Chronic conditions, they say, can cause difficulties that reduce sex drive. For diabetes, specifically, the material points to both direct biological effects, like nerve damage,
Oh, okay.
which can affect sensation, and also psychological effects, things like how the condition impacts self-image or just causes fatigue.
So it's like a double whammy sometimes.
Yeah, kind of a combination effect.
Pregnancy is another unique physical state the sources address for females.
Right. A study noted that females often report decreased sexual activity and libido during pregnancy.
Which isn't maybe too surprising.
No, given the huge physical and hormonal shifts involved, it makes sense.
And then there's the relational side. How satisfied someone is in their relationship. That's listed.
It is, yeah. A 2018 study specifically found that some females' libido might decrease based on their satisfaction level within their relationship.
That's really fascinating, how relationship dynamics can actually show up physiologically like that.
It's a powerful reminder that desire isn't just biological, right? It's deeply interpersonal, too.
Definitely. Okay, finally, a really big category for decreasing libido seems to be medication.
Oh, yeah, a very significant one. The sources list several types. Chemotherapy treatments, for instance.
How so?
Well, they can reduce testosterone in men, and they can cause early menopause in women. Both of those can lead to a decrease in libido.
Got it.
Female hormonal birth control is also highlighted in a review, specifically mentioning the contraception ring, the injection, and the implant
Okay.
as methods that may decrease libido for some users. Not all, but potentially.
And antidepressants, those are so widely prescribed.
They are, and the sources note a historical link between the use of certain antidepressants and difficulties with sexual health, including decreased sex drive.
Wow. Okay, just running through that list. I mean, physical health conditions, major life stages like menopause or pregnancy, the impact of chronic illness, psychological factors like anxiety or depression, relationship quality, cultural background, and a whole host of medications. It really just underscores how many different things can influence desire. Yeah. It's definitely not just one simple thing going on.
Exactly. It's this incredibly complex web of influences.
Okay, so with that incredibly long list of things that can potentially dial desire down, it makes you wonder, did the source material offer any insights into ways people might try to increase their sex drive? What approaches are discussed there?
Yeah, the sources do outline several potential avenues based on the research or practices they reviewed. Sex therapy is one.
Okay.
It's noted as a way to assist with sexual difficulties, which, can help increase sex drive and also improve sexual function generally, like potentially helping with orgasm, too.
Therapy makes sense, especially if psychological factors are playing a big part. What about more lifestyle type things? Sleep is mentioned.
Sleep appears relevant, yes. A 2023 study, the sources cite associated low-quality sleep with sexual difficulties. So the suggestion is that ensuring you get sufficient good quality sleep could be beneficial for libido.
Makes sense, just for overall well-being, too.
Totally.
And the age-old question, aphrodisiacs. Did the sources touch on that at all?
They did, yeah, referencing some research. There's mention of 2013 research on certain herbal aphrodisiacs, things like yohimbine and Uricoma longifolia,
Okay.
potentially helping male sex drive. The sources also list some traditional foods sometimes cited for possible aphrodisiac properties, though they note without strong research backing mentioned for these specifically.
Like what?
Strawberries, chocolate, and raw oysters.
The classics.
Exactly. So it's kind of a mix, some limited herb research on the one hand, and then these more traditional beliefs on the other.
Interesting distinction there. Okay. Exercise came up earlier as something linked to higher libido. Is it listed here as a potential way to increase it too?
Yes, exercise is reiterated. It's mentioned again as a potential method to boost libido. The sources also add mindfulness and yoga into that category.
Ah, okay. Physical and mental practices together.
Seems so, yeah. Practices that might have a positive effect.
And finally, testosterone therapy. That's mentioned again, this time as a potential way to boost desire.
That's discussed, but with some nuance in the sources.
How so?
Well, for older males who have clinically low testosterone, studies suggest therapy can potentially help them regain sexual desire. That seems relatively clear from the sources.
Okay.
For females, though, the research appears more mixed based on what's presented. A 2016 paper mentioned suggested it's unlikely to increase female sexual desire.
Right.
But then a 2019 review indicated it can boost libido in females.
So conflicting findings.
Yeah, or at least evolving understanding. The key takeaway from the source seems to be that more research is still needed in this area, particularly for women.
Okay, so let's recap those potential boosters according to the sources. Things like sex therapy, prioritizing sleep, maybe exploring certain herbal options, or even just enjoyable food sometimes linked to desire. Regular exercise, mindfulness practices like yoga, and for some people, potentially testosterone therapy, but that depends on the situation and sex, and needs more research, especially for women.
Right. Those are the approaches identified in the source material that research has looked into as potential ways to support or increase libido.
This really brings us back to where we started, doesn't it? That initial question, what is normal sex drive? With all this variation, all these factors swirling around, how should we even think about that concept of normal?
Well, the sources come back really strongly to the idea that sex drive exists on a spectrum.
Right.
What is normal isn't some single number or frequency you have to hit. It's highly individual. It's really about what feels right and desirable for you.
And accepting that it changes.
Exactly. Accepting that it naturally fluctuates over your life.
So there's no, universal standard we should be trying to measure up against.
Not according to these sources, no. They do, however, briefly mention the concept of sexual functioning disorders as points at the more extreme ends of the spectrum, where it goes beyond typical fluctuation.
Can you give us just a brief, accessible description of those, based strictly on how the sources define them?
Sure. One is female sexual interest arousal disorder, or FSIAD.
Right.
The sources describe this as a persistent lack of sexual desire or arousal. And importantly, it causes distress. And it isn't explained by another medical condition or medication side effect.
Got it. And treatments.
They note that counseling or sometimes medication may be potential treatments.
Okay. And the other one mentioned?
The other is compulsive sexual behavior, which, the sources note, the World Health Organization now includes as an impulse control disorder.
Oh.
And as defined in the sources, it's characterized by this persistent pattern where someone feels unable to control intense, repetitive sexual urges or impulses. This leads to repetitive sexual behavior that causes significant distress or problems in their life, work, relationships, etc.
Got it. So points on the spectrum where the experience moves from just variation to becoming a source of significant difficulty or distress for the person.
Exactly.
And the overall advice then, from the sources, if someone is feeling concerned about their own libido, maybe it's changed, maybe it's causing them worry.
The clear advice is, if you are worried about changes in your libido or if it's causing you distress, it's a good idea to discuss this with a doctor.
Makes sense.
It's about addressing your personal well-being, not comparing yourself to some hypothetical average out there.
This has certainly been a deep dive. Wow. We've explored the definition, the incredible number of factors, physical, mental, relational, external, that can influence desire in different directions, and looked at some potential avenues for support or change, all pulled directly from the sources we had.
It really highlights how much more goes into our sex drive than many of us might initially think, doesn't it?
Totally.
It's just so deeply personal and seems really responsive to so many different inputs.
Absolutely. And hopefully, exploring all these dimensions provides you, the listener, with a more informed perspective, whether you were curious about your own experience or just the topic in general.
Yeah, I think it does. It certainly paints a much clearer, maybe more complex picture.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to mull over, drawn directly from just the sheer volume and variety of factors we just discussed from the sources.
Okay.
Considering the incredible number and complexity of things that can influence libido. I mean, from the specific medication you might be taking to how satisfied you feel in your relationship today, from whether you got enough sleep last night to your exercise routine this week, your cultural background, to just getting older. What does all that tell us about just how fluid and responsive our desire truly is? And maybe just how subjective the very idea of normal must be when we talk about this deeply personal aspect of our health and well-being.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about indeed.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into libido. We hope it's giving you a richer, more nuanced understanding, pulled directly from the source material you provided.